My name is Fiza Khatri. I am an artist. I'm currently based in New Haven, Connecticut, and I'd say my practice is primarily drawings and paintings that sort of speak to like intimate encounters with myself, with the world, between sort of things that I encounter in the world. I didn't grow up around a lot of art at all. I don't think I saw paintings in person until like maybe high school or even much later. And yeah, I wasn't familiar with art history. Like it wasn't something that was a part of my visual culture growing up. Like I grew up with like Bollywood and like, like TV show, like drama, serials, Pakistani, Indian, like that was my kind of visual culture. So I think it was more the practice that sort of kept me engaged. Like when I went to undergrad, I already knew that I was interested in doing art, and it doesn't have to be like drawing and painting. But then I sort of had my first like drawing class in which we were drawing from observation. Honestly, just like something clicked. Like I think the way that drawing and painting from life, from observation, and the way that was so deeply connected to the body of the artist who was doing the observing, and then like that being a way to create this connection with the object or the space or whatever it was that was being observed, like the subject. I think I had like a really embodied sort of response to that, where I was just like, this is a great way for me to relate to the world, to figure out my relationship to the world. And I just, at the time I didn't have language around this. It was more just like, I was like, I want to keep doing this, like sort of paying attention to the environment, deeply observing an environment and finding sort of meaning there, finding sort of relationships, finding like larger conceptual frameworks even sometimes, which for me has turned into like sort of looking towards the everyday and finding like traces of like social and cultural and sort of like structural cues that I'm really interested in engaging with. So when I moved to Karachi after undergrad, when I went back, I was making paintings and drawings about my friends and my community and the spaces that we were building together. These sort of like feminist and queer collectives that I was a part of, the animals within them, the physical spaces that we sort of were trying to carve out and sustain for ourselves, to be together, to sort of hold space for each other. And this idea of also just like, through portraiture and through painting the people who were a part of my community, sort of being witness to each other, paying attention to each other, and building sort of like a visual practice around that, I think is what my work was really kind of engaging with. That's a wonderful question. I think the materiality of painting definitely has a lot to do with it. I remember like in like a painting one class, like my teacher describing paint as mud, and talking about like creating sort of this beautiful like singular image out of like, earth and pigment and crap basically. And I was like, whoa, what a beautiful sort of idea, And I think there is something to me still like magical about that. I think on an embodied level, like I really respond to, I think, the idea of touch in painting. It's like sort of this like direct sort of extension of like the paintbrush becomes like a direct extension of my hand and my sort of like idea of like touch. And I'm really interested in how like sort of creating a painting can be sort of this way of touching an image into being in relationship to the world, right? Like sort of observing something, for instance, which is a really slow process. It really sort of slows me down. It slows down sort of the person, if I'm painting a person from life, like who's sitting with me. And sort of just makes us like share space and time in this like really condensed, intense, and also like slow way. Like I've sort of had a really wonderful time. Like I feel a lot closer to people if I sort of have that experience with them. And I think one thing that I've sort of been interested in recently in my work is sort of with regards to the idea of touch is also incorporating like different ideas of touch. Within the space of creating images and painting, I think I've been really interested in the space for like fantasy and fiction in relation to my work, but also just like fiction in general. And the fact that, you know, within painting, it is possible to sort of incorporate like different timelines, different spaces, you know, and like layer them, like layer history, layer ideas of place, layer mark, layer gesture. Like there is so much that a painting can hold that can exist outside of like the framework of our reality, you know? Like I'm really interested in how within painting, like I can make moves and I can make decisions that sort of like the self-portraits that I've been making. It's been sort of a series of sort of self-portraits that imagine my body as changing, as sort of transforming in every self-portrait in a different way. The permission that painting gives me to enact gestures like that, to sort of like imagine me like transforming into my father, for instance, like in one self-portrait, or like sort of, you know, my sort of like face changing and like facial hair or my body changing, and to sort of enact that as a self-portrait, but also as a fiction within the same context, within the space of painting. Like I think there's great liberty within the frame of painting in the way that it exists separate from the world, right? And that can be sort of a way of isolating it, but it can also, I think, be a way of enabling a different reality or a different condition or a different sort of relationship to the world within the space of the frame. I'm thinking about it similarly to the way I think about space making just as like a feminist and queer person in South Asia. Like I think I've sort of had this really profound experience of like literally creating space, right? Like physical space, like through sort of either like Girls at Dhabas or sort of, you know, like Aurat March or like other sort of more informal collectives and community spaces that I've been a part of. And just like the necessity of, you know, within a normative framework, in a normative context, not fitting within that and needing to carve out and co-create with people spaces where you are both seen and held and safe and sort of able to grow and explore yourself and imagine a future, essentially, right? Like to be able to exist as a person in the world, like all of the things that we need to do that within the context that we would like to be able to do that in. And I think in some ways, like the paintings function similarly in terms of the spaces that I'm interested in depicting in the paintings. Like they are sort of, you know, spaces where people and animals and environments are like seen and witnessed and held and commemorated, and also like placed within like these imagined contexts that can enact gestures of, for instance, repair or healing. A thing that is needed or a thing that is missing can then also sort of coexist within the space of painting alongside the thing that is already here, if that makes sense. So I think those things go hand in hand for me. I love this question. I just don't think, you know, obviously it's not a question that I have a resolved position on. I feel like this is one of those questions that, you know, I could think about for the rest of my life and probably will. There's a lot of room for engagement around how do we want to engage with this sort of like norm that's being created and something that's being sort of identified as a periphery in relation to the norm. But I think for me in particular, I think there's two things, right? Like one, there is a dearth of historical production, like writing, even like archiving around the practices of people who don't fit within the norm. And that is a fact. And I see the book as like a way to remedy that. It's a really great anthology. Like it has sort of like an incredible collection of artists. It's pretty international in its scope, which I really love. I love that it has a strike through on the word woman. I love a strike through, like just sort of, as a form. Like I use a lot of strike throughs in the titles of my paintings. It sort of like speaks to revision and editing and growth and learning in a way that I really respond to. It's also about engaging with a pre-existing conversation while maybe making another one possible. I also sort of read it within like the strike through. Like I've personally really enjoyed reading it as like identity based, right? So to kind of be like, okay, like maybe woman, maybe not woman. I identify as non-binary, and it's been interesting to be in an anthology of women strike through artists, and that's how I sort of enjoyed finding my place within it. Is to kind of be like, well, but it also speaks to sort of like a certain fluidity, perhaps, or just like identity as like a construction, which is something that I'm sort of really interested in. So I think there's a lot of things that the book is playing with that I'm interested in. And I think it's incredible to be included in something like that. It's a real honor to feel sort of seen and recognized for my practice and to be included within sort of this incredible collection of artists. I think being a painter does mean, for me, being like engaging with an art historical canon. The format of painting that I'm engaged with is very historical. Like I'm painting on stretched canvas, around wooden stretcher bars. I'm thinking of the way that I compose and frame my paintings. A lot of the motifs that I use also come directly from like art historical references. Like I'm really interested in the bather as a motif, which you see in like Cézanne's work, like some of Matisse's work. Like it sort of comes up over and over again. And I've been really interested in like what happens if I locate specificity within that. And I've been interested in sort of like also intervening within that idea of like domestic space or public space, private space, indoor, outdoor, those things existing at the same time. I've also been looking at how a lot of these kinds of frameworks function within other like painting histories, like in sort of a lot of miniature painting in particular, where you also have like a ubiquitous figure of a woman lounging in a countryside with other women, which I think, on the one hand is like an incredibly queer experience, but then on the other hand is also like a site for objectification, right? Like depending on how the gaze is addressed. So I've been interested in sort of like remixing or like recontextualizing or like readdressing some of these motifs. And this is one sort of like very specific historical lineage that I feel like my work is in conversation with. I think the self-portrait is another one. I think a lot about like sort of figures like Claude Cahun or Frida Kahlo, like basically like artists who sort of took the space of self-portrait, of self-portrait or the format of self-portraiture to enact like a kind of play, a kind of performance, a kind of fictitious world building in relation to their own bodies and the way that their bodies relate to the world. I think there's a lot that I'm really interested in, and that I love painting. Like as problematic and like messy painting is, like as like capitalist as it is, like I love the medium of painting. I sort of, love looking at painting, engaging with painting. I love making paintings. So it's a complicated relationship.